The doorbell rang at 7 in the morning, and I knew something was wrong. My daughter-in-law, Sarah, never visited this early unless there was trouble. When I opened the door, her eyes were red from crying, and she was holding a stack of papers. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're from in the comments. My name is Helen Martinez. I'm 64 years old, and last month I made the biggest mistake of my life. Sarah pushed past me into my living room, spreading bills across my coffee table like playing cards. "Helen, we need your help desperately," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear. The bills were scary-looking documents from collection agencies. Each one had red stamps and bold letters threatening legal action. Sarah pointed to the largest one with trembling fingers. "This one is for medical bills from when I had that emergency surgery last year. They want $12,000 immediately, or they'll take our house." I stared at the papers, feeling my heart break for this young woman who'd married my son just 2 years ago. "Where's Michael?" I asked, looking around for my boy. "He's at work, trying to pick up extra shifts, but it's not enough." "Helen, they called yesterday and said if we don't pay by Friday, they'll send lawyers to our door." I'd been saving money for my dream trip to Italy for 3 years. Every penny from my part-time job at the library went into that special account. I was so close to having enough for the tour I'd always wanted to take. But looking at Sarah's desperate face, how could I think about vacation when my family was in danger? "These collection people, they're not playing games," Sarah continued, wiping her nose with a tissue. "They said they know where Michael works, where we live, everything about us. I'm so scared they'll ruin his career." The fear in her voice was real, and my grandmother instincts kicked in immediately. I couldn't let my children suffer when I had the power to help them. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out my savings book. The number $13,200 stared back at me, representing months of careful planning and excited dreams about Italian museums and beautiful churches. But family comes first, always. When I returned to the living room, Sarah was crying into her hands. "Don't worry, sweetie," I said, sitting beside her on the couch. "I have money saved up that can help you." Her head shot up, eyes wide with disbelief. "Really? You do that for us?" "Of course I would. You're family now." I opened my checkbook and started writing, even though my hand was shaking a little. This was my Italy money, but Italy would still be there next year. Sarah's freedom from these scary bills couldn't wait. Sarah watched me write the check for $13,000 like she couldn't believe what was happening. "Oh, Helen, you're saving our lives," she breathed, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise we'll pay you back as soon as we can get ahead of these bills." "Don't worry about paying me back right now," I said, tearing out the check and placing it in her hands. "Just focus on getting this nightmare behind you." She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and for a moment, I felt like the hero of my own story. I was the grandmother who stepped up when her family needed her most. What I didn't know was that I'd just made the worst decision of my entire life. For the next few days, I felt proud of what I'd done. When my neighbor Betty asked about my Italy trip, I told her about the family emergency with quiet satisfaction. "That's what family does, Betty," I explained while we tended our garden together. "We take care of each other when times get tough." Betty nodded, but I noticed she gave me a strange look. "Have you actually seen these medical bills yourself?" she asked, pulling weeds with more force than necessary. "Sarah showed me the collection notices," I replied, feeling a little defensive. "Why would you ask that?" "No reason," Betty said quickly. "I just think it's wonderful how generous you are with Michael and Sarah." But something in her tone made me uncomfortable, like she knew something I didn't. The doubt started small, just a tiny whisper in the back of my mind during quiet moments. I kept thinking about how Sarah had come alone that morning, how she'd known exactly how much money was needed, how the bills had been organized so neatly. But I pushed these thoughts away because thinking bad things about family felt wrong. Michael called me 3 days later, his voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, you're incredible," he said. "Sarah told me what you did, and I can't believe how lucky we are to have you." His happiness should have made me feel better, but instead, it made the whisper in my head grow a little louder. Something about his tone didn't sound like relief. It sounded like celebration. That's when Betty knocked on my door with her tablet computer in her hands. "Helen, you need to see this," she said, her face serious and concerned. I don't usually check social media, but my daughter showed me something that made my blood run cold. She opened up Sarah's Facebook page and showed me photo after photo of a beautiful cruise ship. There was Sarah in a fancy dress, standing on a deck with the ocean behind her. There was Michael in a tuxedo, holding up a glass of champagne. There was Sarah's mother, who I'd never met, wearing expensive jewelry and laughing at an elegant dinner table. The photos were all posted yesterday, and every single one showed my family living like millionaires while I sat at home with an empty savings account. I stared at those cruise photos until my eyes burned. Each picture felt like a punch to my stomach. There was Sarah getting a massage at the ship spa. There was Michael playing mini golf on the upper deck. There was the whole group toasting with expensive wine at what looked like a captain's dinner. The captions made me feel sick. "Best surprise vacation ever." Sarah had written, "My amazing husband planned this whole trip as a surprise." Michael had posted, "Family time with my beautiful wife and mother-in-law." But where was I? Where was the grandmother who'd made this luxury vacation possible with her Italy savings? I was home in my kitchen, looking at pictures of people spending my dreams while pretending I didn't exist. Betty sat beside me while I scrolled through more photos, her hand on my shoulder as I shook with anger. "That cruise costs at least $15,000, she said quietly. "I know because my sister took the same one last year." "Helen, they used your money to pay for a fancy vacation while lying to you about medical bills." The truth hit me like cold water. There were no collection agencies. There were no scary bills. There was just my son and his wife, planning an expensive cruise and deciding that Grandma Helen would be the perfect person to pay for it. They'd looked me in the eye, made me feel like a hero for helping them, and then spent my life savings on champagne and spa treatments without even inviting me along for the trip I was funding. I called Michael's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried Sarah's number, and the same thing happened. They were probably having too much fun spending my money to answer calls from the old lady who'd made their vacation possible. I left a message that I hoped would ruin their fancy dinner. "Michael, I saw the cruise photos on Facebook. We need to talk immediately. I hope you're enjoying the vacation I paid for while I sit here wondering why my own family would lie to me like this. Call me back right now." Then I hung up and waited, pacing around my house like a caged animal. Betty stayed with me, making tea and letting me rant about trust and family loyalty and how stupid I'd been to believe their fake emergency. 2 hours later, my phone finally rang. Michael's voice sounded panicked and guilty, like a little boy caught stealing cookies from the jar. "Mom, I can explain everything," he started, but I cut him off immediately. "Explain what, Michael? How you lied to me about collection agencies. How you let me give up my Italy trip so you could take your wife and her mother on a luxury cruise. How you made me feel like a hero while you spent my savings on room service and spa treatments." There was silence on the other end, and I could hear party music and laughter in the background. They were calling me from their stolen vacation, surrounded by the luxury my sacrifice had purchased. The contrast between their celebration and my betrayal made my anger burn even hotter. Michael tried to defend himself with weak excuses that made everything worse. "Mom, we were going to tell you about the cruise, but we wanted it to be a surprise. We thought you'd be happy that we got to take a nice vacation together." "A surprise?" I shouted into the phone. "The surprise is that my son is a liar who steals from his mother. You let me think Sarah was in danger from collection agencies while you were booking spa appointments and fancy dinners. If you wanted to take a cruise, why didn't you just ask me honestly instead of making up that horrible story about medical bills?" The phone went quiet except for the sound of ocean waves, and I realized Michael didn't have an answer, because there was no good answer. They'd chosen to lie because they'd known I would say no to funding their luxury vacation. That's when Sarah took the phone from Michael, and her voice was completely different from the crying, desperate woman who'd sat in my living room. "Helen, you're being unreasonable," she said, her tone cold and annoyed. "We didn't lie about needing money. We needed it for this trip, which is important for our marriage. You have plenty of money sitting in your accounts doing nothing, so what's the difference if we use some of it for something that makes us happy?" The casual way she dismissed my feelings and rewrote history made my blood boil. The difference, Sarah, is that it's my money, and you lied to get it. You made me think you were in trouble with dangerous people when you were actually planning a vacation that cost more than some people make in a year. And you didn't even invite the person who paid for the whole thing. Sarah's response revealed who she really was underneath her fake tears and desperate act. Helen, we're young and we need experiences while we can still enjoy them. You've already lived your life and traveled when you were younger. It's our turn now to make memories and have adventures. Besides, when you die, Michael will inherit everything anyway, so really we just borrowed against our future inheritance. The cruelty of her words left me speechless. She was talking about my death like it was a business transaction, like my life savings was already theirs to spend however they wanted. I'd raised Michael to respect his elders and value family, but somehow he'd married a woman who saw his mother as nothing more than a bank account with legs. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the empty space where my Italy brochures used to be scattered across the table. Betty had gone home, but she'd left a bottle of wine and a note saying she'd be back tomorrow to help me figure out what to do next. I opened the wine and poured myself a large glass, something I rarely did, but this seemed like an emergency. My son had stolen from me. My daughter-in-law had shown her true character. And somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea, they were probably laughing about how easy it had been to trick the lonely old lady into paying for their dream vacation. The betrayal hurt worse than losing the money. I trusted them completely, and they'd used that trust to manipulate and rob me. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head and a strong sense of purpose. I wasn't going to sit around feeling sorry for myself while they enjoyed their stolen vacation. If they wanted to play games with my money and my trust, then I was going to teach them about consequences. I called my lawyer, Janet Morrison, who'd helped me with my will after my husband died. Janet, I need to change my will immediately, and I need to explore legal options against my son and daughter-in-law for fraud. Her voice sharpened with interest when I explained what had happened. Helen, what they did might qualify as elder financial abuse, which is a serious crime. Let's meet today and discuss your options. For the first time since seeing those cruise photos, I felt like I had some power back. Janet's office was filled with law books and family photos, a place where important decisions got made. She listened to my story with the focused attention of someone who'd heard similar tales before. Helen, this isn't just about the money, she said when I finished explaining everything. This is about your son and daughter-in-law believing they can manipulate you without consequences. If you don't respond strongly, they'll keep doing it whenever they want something expensive. She pulled out legal documents and started explaining my options. I could file criminal charges for fraud and theft. I could sue them in civil court for the return of my money plus damages. Most importantly, I could change my will to ensure they never benefited from treating me this way again. The will changes felt like the most important decision I'd ever made. Originally, I'd left everything to Michael because he was my only child and I trusted him to be responsible with his inheritance. But Janet helped me see that leaving money to someone who'd already stolen from me was just enabling future bad behavior. We drafted a new will that left most of my estate to charity organizations that helped elderly people avoid financial abuse. Michael would get a small amount, enough to know I still loved him, but not enough to fund any more luxury vacations. Sarah would get nothing, because people who steal from family don't deserve to benefit from that family's death. The changes felt like taking back control of my own life and money. While they were still on their cruise, I spent the week gathering evidence of their fraud. I printed out every social media post showing them living luxuriously on my money. I organized all the fake medical bills Sarah had shown me, which Janet confirmed were probably printed from templates found online. I documented the timeline of their lies, from Sarah's crying performance in my living room to their celebration posts from the ship's restaurants. By the time they returned home, I had a complete case file that proved their guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. They thought they were so smart, posting their stolen vacation online for everyone to see. They'd actually created perfect evidence of their own crime. Betty helped me plan their homecoming surprise. We knew they'd be tired from traveling and relaxed from their stolen vacation, expecting to slip back into normal life without consequences for what they'd done. I wanted to catch them at their most vulnerable moment, when they thought they'd gotten away with the perfect crime. We sat by my front window Sunday evening, watching their driveway like detectives on a stakeout. When their car finally pulled up at 6:30, they moved slowly and happily, unloading suitcases full of vacation clothes and probably souvenirs bought with my money. They had no idea that their lives were about to change forever. I felt nervous, but determined as I walked across the street to deliver justice. I knocked on their door with my folder of evidence tucked under my arm like a weapon. Michael answered, looking tanned and relaxed, clearly expecting a normal conversation with his mother. "Hi, Mom. What brings you over?" he said with a guilty smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I came to welcome you both home from your Mediterranean cruise," I replied, pushing past him into their living room. Sarah appeared from the kitchen, wearing new jewelry that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. They both froze when they saw the serious expression on my face, finally realizing that their lies had caught up with them. I spread my evidence across their coffee table like a prosecutor presenting a case to the jury, watching their faces change from confusion to fear to resignation. The fake medical bills Sarah had shown me were still sitting on their kitchen counter, forgotten props from their elaborate con game. I held up one of the collection notices next to a printout of their cruise photos. "Sarah," I said calmly, "could you explain how you managed to take a $15,000 cruise while owing $12,000 to collection agencies?" Her face went white, and she looked at Michael for help, but he was staring at the evidence like a deer caught in headlights. "These photos show you getting spa treatments and eating at specialty restaurants while I sat home thinking you were hiding from dangerous debt collectors. You didn't just lie to me about needing money. You made me believe my daughter-in-law's life was in danger, so I'd give up my dreams to save yours." Michael finally tried to defend their actions, but his excuses sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "Mom, we really did need the money, and we thought the cruise would help our marriage get stronger. You always said family was the most important thing, so we figured you'd understand if we used your savings for something that brought the family together." I laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Family? You mean the family cruise that included Sarah's mother, but not the grandmother who paid for it? You mean the family bonding that happened while I sat home alone, worried sick about collection agencies that never existed? Michael, you didn't use my money for family. You used it to exclude me from the family while stealing from me to fund your exclusion." Sarah tried a different approach, switching from fake remorse to righteous anger in the space of a heartbeat. "Helen, you're being dramatic about this whole thing. We borrowed money from you temporarily, and we'll pay it back when we can. Lots of families help each other out financially. You're acting like we committed some terrible crime when all we did was ask for help during a difficult time." Her casual rewriting of history made my anger spike higher than before. "Asked for help?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You mean when you sat in my living room crying about fake medical bills and imaginary debt collectors? When you made me believe your life was in danger? That wasn't asking for help, Sarah. That was fraud, and it's a crime that could send you both to prison." That's when I pulled out the legal documents Janet had prepared, setting them on the table next to the vacation photos. "I visited my lawyer this week and learned some very interesting things about elder financial abuse laws. When adult children steal money from their elderly parents using deception and emotional manipulation, it's not just theft. It's a special category of crime that carries serious penalties. I could file criminal charges against both of you that would result in felony convictions and jail time. I could sue you in civil court for 3 times the amount you stole, plus legal fees. Most importantly, I've already changed my will to ensure that people who steal from me never benefit from my death." The color drained from both their faces as they realized their actions had consequences they'd never considered. Michael picked up the new will with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the document that removed his inheritance and gave his future to charity instead. "Mom, you can't be serious about this. We made a mistake, but we're still family. You can't cut us out completely over one bad decision." "It wasn't one bad decision, Michael. It was weeks of planning and lying and manipulating my love for you to steal my life savings. You studied my savings habits, created fake bills, practiced your sob story, and then celebrated your success on social media while I sat home worrying about your safety. That's not a mistake. That's a criminal enterprise that targeted your own mother." Sarah was reading over his shoulder now, Her face twisted with rage as she realized her future inheritance had disappeared along with their vacation fund. The legal documents laid out their options clearly and simply. They could return my $13,000 within 30 days, plus interest and penalties, or face criminal prosecution for elder financial abuse. They could accept the new will and try to rebuild our relationship through honest behavior, or continue lying and lose any chance of family reconciliation. Most importantly, they could use this experience to learn about consequences and become better people, or they could keep making excuses and face increasingly serious legal problems. I stood up to leave, gathering my evidence with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally taken control of a bad situation. You have 24 hours to decide how you want to handle this, but either way, the days of stealing from me are over forever. As I walked toward their front door, Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "This is all about money with you, isn't it?" she screamed, her voice shrill with desperation. "You'd rather destroy your relationship with your only son than forgive us for borrowing money we were going to pay back anyway. You're a bitter old woman who cares more about her bank account than her family's happiness." I turned back to face her, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. "Sarah," I said quietly, "this was never about money. This was about trust, respect, and treating family members like human beings instead of ATM machines. You chose to steal from me instead of asking honestly. You chose to lie about dangerous situations instead of telling the truth about wanting a vacation. Every choice you made showed me exactly how little you think of me as a person." Michael tried one last desperate attempt to avoid consequences for their actions. "Mom, if you file charges against us, it'll ruin my career and Sarah's reputation. Everyone will know what we did, and we'll never be able to live it down. Please think about what this will do to our future before you make any final decisions." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and kind, who'd chosen to become a liar and thief instead. "Michael, you should have thought about your future before you decided to steal from your mother. You should have considered your reputation before you posted vacation photos bought with stolen money. I'm not the one who chose to risk your career and your future. You made that choice when you decided my dreams were less important than your vacation plans." The drive home felt like waking up from a bad nightmare. Betty was waiting on my front porch with coffee and cookies, ready to hear every detail of the confrontation. "They look like someone had told them their house was on fire," she said with satisfaction after I finished my story. "Good. Maybe now they'll understand that actions have consequences, even when the person you're hurting is family." We sat on my porch in the evening sun, planning my next steps. I would give them exactly 24 hours to decide between returning my money or facing criminal charges. Either way, I was finally free from their manipulation and lies. For the first time in months, I felt like the strong, independent woman I'd always been before they started treating me like a victim. The next morning brought a desperate phone call from Michael, his voice shaky with panic and regret. "Mom, we've been up all night talking and we realize how wrong we were. We want to make this right, but we spent most of the cruise money already and we don't have $13,000 to give you back immediately. Could we set up a payment plan to return what we owe you over time?" I sipped my coffee and considered his request. The fact that they'd spent my life savings so quickly showed how little they valued the sacrifice I'd made for their fake emergency. A payment plan would be better than nothing, but it wouldn't undo the fundamental damage they'd done to our relationship through their elaborate lies and betrayal. I gave Michael the same answer I'd given them the night before. "You have until 6 o'clock tonight to return my money or face criminal charges. If you can't pay me back immediately, then you obviously shouldn't have stolen the money in the first place. Your lack of planning doesn't create an emergency for me to solve with patience and understanding. You wanted to live like millionaires on my savings, so figure out how to return my money, like the adults you pretend to be." I hung up the phone and called Janet to confirm our afternoon appointment. By 7 o'clock tonight, I would either have my money back or my son and daughter-in-law would be facing felony charges. Either outcome was better than letting them think they could steal from me without serious consequences. At 5:30 that evening, Michael and Sarah appeared at my door with a cashier's check for $13,000 and expressions of complete defeat. The money came from Sarah's mother, who'd apparently been furious to learn that her daughter had used stolen funds to pay for their family vacation. Sarah couldn't even look me in the eye as she handed over the check, her previous arrogance replaced by shame and embarrassment. "We got the money back," Michael said quietly, "but Mom, what happens to us now? Do we still have a relationship? Or is this the end of our family?" I looked at these two people who'd betrayed my trust so completely, trying to decide if redemption was possible or if some relationships couldn't survive certain types of betrayal. The cashier's check felt heavy in my hands, representing not just returned money, but a kind of justice I'd never expected to achieve. $13,000 was exactly what they'd stolen, but it couldn't buy back the trust they'd destroyed or erase the memory of their elaborate lies. I deposited the check immediately, then sat in my bank parking lot thinking about forgiveness and consequences and whether some actions were too hurtful to overcome. Michael was still my son, the little boy I'd raised with love and patience. But he was also the man who'd looked me in the eye and lied about his wife's safety to steal my life savings. Some betrayals leave scars that never completely heal, even when the money gets returned. 2 weeks later, I booked my trip to Italy using the returned money plus some additional savings I'd managed to accumulate. The travel agent was excited to help me plan the adventure I'd dreamed about for so many years. "Mrs. Martinez," she said with genuine enthusiasm, "September is absolutely perfect for Italy. You're going to see the most beautiful art and architecture in the world." As I left her office with my confirmed itinerary, I felt lighter than I had in months. My son and daughter-in-law had tried to steal my dreams, but they'd actually taught me something valuable about protecting myself and demanding respect. The Italy trip would be even sweeter, knowing I'd fought to make it happen despite their attempt to destroy it. The flight to Rome was everything I'd imagined and more. As the plane circled the ancient city, I pressed my face to the window like a child seeing magic for the first time. The Colosseum looked exactly like the pictures, but somehow more real and more amazing than I'd ever expected. My hotel room had a view of narrow streets filled with people living their daily lives in a place where history happened thousands of years ago. I unpacked my carefully planned outfits and my new camera, feeling proud of myself for not letting Michael and Sarah's betrayal destroy this moment. They tried to steal my dreams, but dreams are harder to kill than they thought. Sometimes the sweetest victories come after the hardest fights. Standing in the Vatican Museum, surrounded by artwork that had existed for centuries, I thought about the lesson my son and daughter-in-law had inadvertently taught me. I'd spent years being the generous grandmother, always willing to help family members who claimed to need assistance. But generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's enabling bad behavior and teaching people that manipulation works better than honesty. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted by Michelangelo with his own hands, reminded me that some things are worth protecting from people who don't understand their value. My savings, my trust, and my respect were treasures that deserved to be guarded carefully and shared only with people who earn them through honest relationships. In Florence, I ate pasta made by a chef who'd learned his recipes from his grandmother, continuing traditions that connected past and present in the most beautiful way. The food tasted even better knowing I was eating it with money I'd fought to keep, in a place I'd refused to let anyone steal from me. Michael had called twice since I'd left for Italy, but I hadn't answered. Some conversations needed to wait until I was ready to have them, and I wasn't ready to discuss forgiveness while I was busy living the dreams they'd tried to destroy. The Tuscan sunset painted everything golden, including my growing sense that I'd finally learned to value myself as much as I valued other people. Self-respect, I discovered, was the most delicious ingredient in any meal. The cooking class in a small Tuscan village taught me more than just how to make homemade pasta. The Italian grandmother who led our group spoke about famiglia, family, with tears in her eyes. "Family is sacred," she said in careful English, "but sacred doesn't mean you let people hurt you because they share your blood. Even family must earn respect through love and honesty, or they are not truly family at all." Her words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I'd been so focused on being a good mother and grandmother that I'd forgotten to insist on being treated like a valuable person who deserved honesty and respect. Michael and Sarah had trained me to accept whatever behavior they offered because I was afraid of losing them. But I'd lost them already when they chose to become liars and thieves. On the Amalfi Coast, I met other solo travelers who shared stories of family members who'd tried to control their money and their decisions. An elegant woman from Canada told me about her daughter, who tried to convince her that traveling alone was dangerous and irresponsible. A friendly man from Australia described his son, who'd constantly hinted that dad's retirement savings were being wasted on unnecessary luxuries. We laughed together about the audacity of adult children who thought they could manage their parents' lives better than the people who'd successfully raised them to adulthood. Our shared experiences created an instant bond that felt more supportive than many family relationships. Sometimes strangers who respect your choices are better companions than relatives who try to manipulate your decisions. The train ride through the Italian countryside gave me hours to think about the future of my relationship with Michael and Sarah. The rolling hills and ancient farmhouses represented continuity and change, traditions that evolved without losing their essential character. I realized that forgiveness didn't have to mean forgetting or returning to the same patterns that had enabled their bad behavior. I could love my son while also protecting myself from future manipulation. I could maintain a relationship that included boundaries and consequences instead of endless enabling. The new Helen who was emerging from this experience was stronger and wiser than the woman who'd written that check based on fake medical bills and imaginary debt collectors. Change was possible, but only if everyone involved was willing to do the hard work of earning trust through consistent, honest behavior. Back in Rome for my last few days, I finally called Michael from my hotel balcony, overlooking the Pantheon. His voice was small and uncertain when he answered, probably wondering if I was still angry enough to pursue criminal charges despite getting my money back. "Mom, how was your trip?" he asked carefully, like he was testing dangerous waters. "It was everything I dreamed it would be," I replied, which is exactly what it should have been since I saved for 3 years to make it happen. The silence stretched between us across thousands of miles while he processed the implications of my words. I'd taken my Italy trip anyway, proving that his attempt to steal my dreams had ultimately failed. The conversation that followed was the most honest one we'd had in years. Michael's apology was different this time, less focused on making excuses and more focused on accepting responsibility for his choices. "Mom, I know what we did was wrong, and I know sorry isn't enough to fix the damage we caused. I let Sarah convince me that borrowing your money was somehow helping you by bringing the family closer together, but that was just me trying to justify something I knew was dishonest from the beginning. I should have told you the truth about wanting to take a vacation, even if it meant you would have said no. Lying to you and scaring you with fake emergencies was cruel and selfish, and I'm ashamed of the man I became when I chose Sarah's manipulation over your trust." His words sounded genuine, but I'd learned that actions mattered more than apologies. The most important part of our conversation was Michael's acknowledgement that his marriage had serious problems that went beyond their financial dishonesty. Sarah's reaction to getting caught had revealed character flaws that were impossible to ignore or excuse. Her willingness to steal from family, her casual attitude toward lying, and her complete lack of remorse had opened Michael's eyes to aspects of his wife's personality he'd previously overlooked or rationalized away. "Mom, I think I need to make some difficult decisions about my future," he said quietly. "I can't stay married to someone who thinks stealing from my mother is acceptable behavior. The cruise was supposed to save our marriage, but it actually showed me that some problems can't be fixed with expensive vacations and stolen money." I felt something shift inside me as I listened to Michael talk about his marriage problems. Part of me wanted to comfort him and tell him everything would work out, the way I'd always done when he faced difficult situations. But the new Helen, the one who'd learned to protect herself and demand honesty, knew that rescuing him from the consequences of his poor choices wouldn't help him grow into a better man. "Michael, you married Sarah knowing she was selfish and materialistic. You chose to participate in her lies because they gave you something you wanted. Now you have to decide if you want to be the kind of person who makes excuses for bad behavior or the kind who takes responsibility for changing it." The conversation ended with no promises or easy solutions, just two people trying to figure out if their relationship could survive complete honesty. 3 months after returning from Italy, I received divorce papers in the mail. Michael was officially ending his marriage to Sarah, and he'd listed her financial dishonesty and manipulation as primary reasons for the dissolution. The legal documents felt like validation that I'd been right to stand up for myself instead of enabling their toxic relationship. Sarah had apparently fought the divorce by claiming that Michael's family had turned him against her, but the judge had reviewed the evidence of their fraud and sided with Michael. Sometimes the legal system actually works to protect honest people from manipulative ones. I felt sad that my son's marriage had failed, but relieved that he'd finally chosen integrity over convenience. The custody arrangement for their 2 young children became the most important part of Michael's new life. He'd moved into a modest apartment and was learning to be a single father who prioritized his kids' needs over impressive vacations and expensive restaurants. When he brought the children to visit me, I could see the stress in his face, but also a kind of peace that came from living honestly. Grandma Helen, his 6-year-old daughter, asked during one visit, "Why doesn't Mommy Sarah come here anymore?" I looked at Michael, wondering how to explain adult dishonesty to a child who still believed in fairness and truth. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people," I said carefully, "and when that happens, families have to change to protect themselves from getting hurt again." Betty and I started a support group for elderly people who'd experienced financial abuse from family members. Meeting in the community center every Tuesday evening, we discovered that our experiences weren't unusual or unique. Dozens of seniors had stories about adult children who'd manipulated their emotions to steal money for unnecessary luxuries. There was Margaret, whose daughter had faked a cancer diagnosis to get money for a kitchen renovation. There was Frank, whose son had created fake business documents to steal his father's retirement savings for a boat purchase. Our shared experiences created a community of people who understood that loving family members doesn't mean accepting abusive treatment from them. Sometimes the best way to love someone is to set boundaries that prevent them from hurting you. The support group sessions taught me vocabulary for experiences I'd never been able to name before. Financial manipulation, emotional blackmail, and elder abuse weren't just academic concepts, but real patterns that affected real families. Learning to identify these behaviors helped me understand that Michael and Sarah's cruise scam wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of treating me like a resource instead of a person. The group discussions also helped me realize that my response to their theft had been exactly right. By demanding consequences and protecting my assets, I'd modeled healthy behavior for other group members who were still trapped in cycles of enabling their abusive relatives. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for survival and dignity. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Michael started therapy to understand why he'd made such poor decisions about money and relationships. His therapist helped him see that his pattern of living beyond his means and manipulating others to fund his lifestyle had roots in deeper issues about self-worth and entitlement. The therapy sessions were expensive, but Michael paid for them himself instead of asking me for help, which felt like genuine progress toward taking responsibility for his own life. When he told me about insights he was gaining about his behavior, I listened supportively but didn't offer advice or solutions. He needed to figure out how to be a better person without my guidance or financial support. Some lessons can only be learned through personal struggle and honest self-reflection. The new will I'd created after their theft remained unchanged, leaving most of my estate to organizations that helped elderly people avoid financial abuse. Michael understood that his inheritance had been permanently reduced as a consequence of his choices, but he didn't argue or try to negotiate better terms. The money would go to people who needed protection from family members like the person he'd temporarily become. When my grandchildren were old enough to understand, I would explain that their college educations had been funded by their father's mistakes, turning his bad decisions into something positive for their futures. Sometimes the best legacy you can leave is proof that actions have consequences and that protecting yourself from abuse is more important than maintaining fake peace with people who hurt you. A year later, I took another solo trip, this time to Greece to see the islands that Michael and Sarah had visited with my stolen money. But this time, I was paying with my own carefully saved funds and creating my own memories instead of funding someone else's betrayal. The cruise ship experience was everything I'd hoped it would be, but the best part was knowing I'd earned it through my own patience and planning rather than someone else's manipulation and theft. Standing on the deck in Santorini, watching the sunset paint the white buildings gold, I felt proud of the woman I'd become. Strong enough to demand respect, wise enough to protect herself, and confident enough to create her own adventures without depending on family members who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. The Greek islands were more beautiful than any social media post could capture, and I documented my trip with photos that showed my genuine joy instead of the fake happiness that comes from stolen experiences. Unlike Sarah's cruise posts, my pictures told the story of someone who'd worked hard, saved carefully, and earned every moment of pleasure through honest effort. I sent a few photos to Michael, not to make him feel guilty, but to show him that dreams delayed aren't dreams destroyed. Sometimes the sweetest victories come to people who refuse to let others steal their hopes and aspirations. The Mediterranean sun felt warmer on my face, knowing I was finally living the life I deserved rather than funding someone else's fantasy at my own expense. On the flight home from Greece, I sat next to a young couple who were celebrating their honeymoon with money they'd saved for 2 years. Their excitement reminded me of the innocent joy I'd felt before learning that family members could be manipulative and dishonest. But their honest happiness also reminded me that not everyone chooses manipulation over integrity when they want something expensive. Good people find ways to afford their dreams without stealing from elderly relatives or lying about fake emergencies. The couple's genuine love for each other contrasted sharply with Michael and Sarah's toxic relationship, which had been built on lies, manipulation, and the willingness to hurt others for personal gain. Real love protects, and honest love never involves deception or theft. Back home in my garden with Betty, I reflected on how much I'd changed since that morning when Sarah had cried in my living room with her fake medical bills. The woman who'd written that check based on lies and manipulation was gone, replaced by someone who understood the difference between helping and enabling. I still loved Michael, but I loved myself enough to maintain the boundaries that protected me from future manipulation. Betty and I planted new flowers that would bloom next spring, symbols of growth and renewal that came after surviving difficult seasons. Some relationships don't survive honesty and accountability, but the ones that do become stronger and more authentic. The choice between enabling and empowering isn't always easy, but it's always necessary for real love to flourish. The second anniversary of their cruise scam passed quietly, marked only by a thoughtful card from Michael acknowledging the date and the lessons he'd learned from his mistakes. His message was simple but genuine. "Mom, thank you for loving me enough to demand better behavior. I'm still learning to be the man you raised me to be." The card meant more to me than any expensive gift because it represented real change rather than empty gestures. Michael had spent 2 years in therapy, working hard jobs to support his children, and building a life based on honesty rather than manipulation. His growth hadn't been easy or quick, but it had been genuine. Some apologies can only be made through consistent changed behavior over time, and Michael was finally making the kind of apology that actually meant something. During our monthly dinners, Michael and I slowly rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. He paid for his own meals, brought his own transportation, and never asked me for money or favors. The conversations were sometimes awkward as we learned to interact as equals rather than enabler and manipulator, but they were also more honest than any discussions we'd had in years. When he talked about struggles with single parenthood or financial pressures, I listened supportively but didn't offer solutions or rescue attempts. He was learning to solve his own problems instead of expecting others to fix them for him. The new dynamic felt healthier for both of us, even though it required more effort and emotional maturity than our old patterns. The support group continued meeting every Tuesday, and our membership grew as more seniors discovered they weren't alone in dealing with financially manipulative family members. I started speaking at community centers and senior organizations about recognizing the warning signs of elder financial abuse. My story about Michael and Sarah's cruise scam resonated with audiences who'd experienced similar betrayals from people they trusted. The presentations weren't about encouraging hatred or permanent estrangement from family, but about empowering elderly people to protect themselves and demand respectful treatment. Love without boundaries isn't really love, I always concluded my talks. It's enablement that hurts everyone involved, including the people whose bad behavior goes unchallenged. 3 years after Italy, I planned another international adventure, this time to Japan during cherry blossom season. The trip represented not just personal growth, but financial recovery from the theft that had once threatened to destroy my travel dreams. As I researched temples and gardens and cultural experiences, I felt grateful for the hard lessons that had taught me to value myself and protect my resources. The woman planning this Japanese adventure was stronger, wiser, and more self-respecting than the grandmother who'd once written checks based on fake sob stories. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin after you stop letting other people steal your destinations and start insisting on choosing your own path forward. Michael's children, now old enough to understand basic concepts about honesty and respect, became my greatest teachers about forgiveness and second chances. They loved their father despite his past mistakes, but they also understood that trust had to be earned through consistent good behavior over time. When 8-year-old Emma asked me why I'd been angry with Daddy and Sarah, I explained that grown-ups sometimes make choices that hurt people they love, and when that happens, the hurt people have to protect themselves until the hurtful people learn to make better choices. It's okay to love someone and still have rules about how they're allowed to treat you, I told her. That's not mean. That's taking care of yourself, so you can keep loving them in a healthy way. The Japanese gardens in Kyoto were even more peaceful than I'd imagined, filled with carefully tended plants that had grown strong through seasons of pruning and careful cultivation. The gardeners explained that the most beautiful trees were often the ones that had survived difficult weather and strategic cutting, emerging more resilient and graceful than plants that had never faced challenges. Their philosophy reminded me of my own journey from victim to survivor to thriver. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed my trust in family had ultimately taught me lessons about self-respect and boundaries that made all my relationships healthier. Like the ancient trees in these gardens, I'd grown stronger through surviving storms that could have destroyed someone who hadn't learned to protect their roots while reaching for the light. Walking through Buddhist temples where monks had practiced self-discipline for centuries, I understood something profound about the difference between selfishness and self-preservation. Taking care of your own needs and protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish. It's necessary for spiritual and emotional health. The monks' teachings about compassion emphasize that real love sometimes requires saying no to behaviors that harm everyone involved. By refusing to enable Michael and Sarah's dishonesty, I'd actually shown them more genuine love than years of financial enabling had ever accomplished. True compassion protects people from the consequences of their bad choices while also refusing to participate in behaviors that cause harm to everyone involved. The cherry blossoms in Tokyo reminded me that beautiful things are often temporary, but their brief appearance makes them more precious rather than less meaningful. My relationship with Michael would never be the same as it had been before his betrayal, but the new version was more honest and respectful than the old dynamic had ever been. We'd both learned lessons about integrity and boundaries that would serve us for the rest of our lives. Sarah had disappeared completely from our lives after the divorce, probably finding new victims to manipulate for her expensive lifestyle. But Michael had chosen the harder path of personal growth and making amends through changed behavior rather than empty words. Some relationships can survive complete honesty, and those are the ones worth preserving. On my last day in Japan, I participated in a tea ceremony that emphasized mindfulness, respect, and the appreciation of simple pleasures. The ritual reminded me that the most satisfying experiences often come from being fully present in moments you've earned through your own effort and integrity. Every sip of tea tasted sweeter because I was drinking it with money I'd saved honestly, in a place I'd chosen freely, surrounded by beauty I was experiencing authentically. The contrast with Michael and Sarah's stolen cruise experience couldn't have been sharper. They documented fake happiness bought with manipulated money, while I was experiencing genuine joy funded by my own careful planning and hard work. The difference between stolen pleasures and earned satisfaction was the difference between temporary gratification and lasting fulfillment. Flying home from Japan, I drafted a letter to my future self to be opened on my 70th birthday in a few years. The letter documented the journey from victim to survivor, from enabler to boundary setter, from lonely grandmother desperate for family approval to independent woman who demanded respectful treatment from everyone in her life. I wanted my future self to remember these lessons when new challenges arose, because manipulative people never completely disappear from anyone's life. The letter ended with a promise: I will never again sacrifice my dreams or my dignity for people who don't value either one. Some promises are too important to break, even when keeping them requires more courage than you think you possess. The woman writing this letter had found that courage through necessity and practice. The community center asked me to become the official coordinator for our elder abuse support group, recognizing the leadership skills I developed through my own recovery process. Accepting the position felt like turning my painful experience into something that could help other people avoid or recover from similar betrayals. Our group now met twice a week and had expanded to include family counseling services for people trying to rebuild relationships after financial abuse. Not every story had a happy ending like Michael's journey toward redemption, but every person who learned to protect themselves and demand respectful treatment was a victory against the epidemic of elder manipulation. Sometimes the most important work you can do grows out of the worst experiences you survive. For years after the cruise incident, Michael remarried a woman named Lisa, who worked as a financial counselor and understood the importance of living within your means. Their wedding was simple and affordable, paid for with money they'd saved together rather than borrowed or stolen from family members. When Michael asked me to walk him down the aisle, I felt proud of the man he'd become through years of therapy, hard work, and honest self-reflection. The wedding toast I gave focused on second chances, personal growth, and the courage required to change destructive patterns that seem comfortable but ultimately harm everyone involved. Lisa's presence in our family felt like proof that good people are attracted to others who've learned to behave with integrity and respect. My grandchildren, now in middle school, often ask me to tell stories about my international adventures and the lessons I'd learned about protecting yourself while still loving difficult family members. They understood that their father had made serious mistakes but had worked hard to become a better person, and they were proud of both his redemption and my strength in demanding it. The family dynamics that emerged from our crisis were healthier than anything we'd experienced before the betrayal occurred. Everyone knew the rules about honesty, respect, and financial boundaries. Everyone understood that love includes accountability and that real relationships can survive complete truth-telling. The children were learning these lessons early, which would protect them from becoming either victims or perpetrators of manipulation in their own future relationships. At 70, I celebrated my birthday with a small party that included Michael, Lisa, the grandchildren, Betty, and several friends from the support group. The celebration was funded entirely with my own money, planned according to my own preferences, and attended only by people who'd earned their invitations through years of respectful behavior. Michael's toast acknowledged the difficult journey we'd both traveled to reach this point of mutual respect and genuine affection. Mom taught me that real love includes consequences and that the people who truly care about you will work hard to earn back trust they've broken, he said, raising his glass to me with tears in his eyes. The applause from our small group felt more meaningful than any elaborate celebration funded by guilt or manipulation could have been. The birthday gifts I received reflected the authentic relationships I'd built through honest communication and clear boundaries. Betty gave me a beautiful journal for recording memories from future travels. Michael and Lisa presented a framed photo of our family taken during a recent picnic, everyone laughing naturally instead of posing for fake social media happiness. The grandchildren had made cards with drawings of all the places they wanted to visit with me when they got older, assuming I'd still be taking adventures well into my 80s. Their confidence in my continued vitality felt like the best gift of all. The woman celebrating this birthday was healthier, happier, and more respected than the grandmother who'd once written checks based on lies and manipulation. Some transformations are worth every difficult moment they require. Looking back over 5 years of growth and change, I could see that Michael and Sarah's betrayal had been a painful gift that forced me to develop strength and wisdom I'd never needed before. The cruise scam had revealed weaknesses in my boundaries and my self-respect that needed to be addressed for my own well-being and the health of all my relationships. Without their lies and theft, I might have continued enabling bad behavior and accepting disrespectful treatment for the rest of my life. Their worst decision had catalyzed my best personal growth, teaching me lessons about dignity and self-protection that had improved every aspect of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up being your most important teachers, even though they never intended to educate you about anything except their own selfishness. The final chapter of the story was still being written through daily choices about how to live with integrity, maintain healthy boundaries, and create relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. My bank account was healthier than it had been in years, filled with money I'd saved for future adventures rather than emergency rescues of manipulative family members. My relationships were stronger because they were based on honesty and earned trust rather than guilt and enabling. Most importantly, my sense of self-worth had been restored through years of practice at demanding respectful treatment from everyone in my life. The woman who'd once been manipulated by fake medical bills had become someone who couldn't be fooled by sob stories or intimidated by emotional blackmail. Standing in my garden on a perfect spring morning, surrounded by flowers I'd planted and tended myself, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this place of peace and self-respect. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of my real life, the life where I valued myself as much as I valued others. Michael's transformation from manipulator to redeemed family member proved that people could change when faced with real consequences for their bad behavior. Sarah's disappearance from our lives proved that some people would rather find new victims than do the hard work of becoming better human beings. Both outcomes had been necessary for my family's healing and growth. Thanks for listening to my story about learning to protect yourself while still keeping your heart open to people who prove they deserve your trust. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma Stories and share your own experiences in the comments below. Remember, it's never too late to start demanding the respect you've always deserved. Your story matters, and your voice is important in helping others learn these difficult but necessary lessons about love, boundaries, and the courage to change relationships that aren't working. Until next time, keep standing up for yourself and never stop believing in second chances for people who earn them through consistent changed behavior.